All right, no rest for the weary. We're going to keep moving through the day, and so hope you've had a chance to eat. Please get seconds, and now it's time for dessert if you don't have it yet. And I wanted to introduce our next panel, but I don't see our next panel here. So, there they are. Oh, good, they're getting mic'd up. Good. I got worried I'm going to have to song and dance, and you don't want to see that. So I. Really, we're just blessed to have you guys here, and so many of you are friends, and so this has been a fun opportunity to be together this time of year. But I was just going to introduce them as friends, but then I went back and looked at their bios, and their body of work over the course of their lifetimes is so magnificent that it requires at least a little bit of more of an introduction than the personal one that I was going to give. So entertain me a little bit, if you will. I want to start with Becky Klein. Becky's on our board, longtime friend. So Becky, principal of Klein Energy, LLC, serves on the board of C3 Solutions, founder and board chair of the Texas Energy Policy Research Institute. She's on multiple other boards, Diamondback Energy, Avista Corporation, San Jose Water Corp Group. She served at the White House under George H., and then at DOD under George W. She served in the military and is a fairly highly ranked official, I'll say. She served on the Texas Public Utility Commission and really is truly an all-around expert. When Texas had its grid issues several years ago related to Winter Storm Uri, tragically, Becky was called in to meet with state regulators to help take the right lessons learned from that tragedy. And one of my fun facts about her is we've been really blessed to have the opportunity to visit she and her husband Dale. They have a ranch vineyard called Klein Vineyard Ranch in the hill country of Texas. And so Texas, as you might know, is kind of the Sonoma Valley of, they have their own sort of Sonoma Valley. I'm completely botching this, but they're like, I think the second in terms of wine production in the country. She's gonna fix my facts. So anyway, Becky is just a dear friend. Mike Howard has become a dear friend. He's chairman and CEO of Howard Energy Partners, one of the largest privately held midstream companies in the U.S. He was on the front lines of the shale gas revolution, so if you want to know really about how that happened, Mike was, boots on, getting dirty out there, making it done. And then he serves on the board of Atlas Energy Solutions, Texoga, Inga, and Jonah Energy. Mike, one of the things I love about Mike is he's a passionate energy advocate, and he really cares a lot about energy education. And not for the sake of energy education just for the industry, but energy education for the sake of people. And so you can look him up. He's done some really great TED's talks on the internet that gives his real vision. You'll get to hear that live here today. And then Dan Ramito is going to try and moderate these two. And Dan, has become a dear friend. He advises capital-intensive businesses on how to navigate the ever-changing energy waters. He served 8 years at the NASDAQ, this little company that we've heard of, and where he was, among other things, global head of investor analytics. He serves on the board of Marquette University Sustainability Lab and is the host of Petronoia, a podcast, which I had the opportunity to be on last week, and then is author of a book called The Radical Middle: How Fossil Fuels and Renewables Can Collaborate on the Future of Energy. So with that, let me call them up here and hand it over to them. Please welcome our panel. Thanks, brother. Thank you.
Thank you for being gracious. All right. Can we go on the other side of you or on the other side?
However you want. No, that was a great introduction, Drew. I do want to take a quick moment to thank Drew. How about we give Drew a round of applause? I mean, when everyone talks about Drew Bond, everyone has great things to say about him. And obviously, I'm not surprised. He's done a fantastic job here. I do want to lead off. Becky and Mike and I were having a discussion And coincidentally, Mike's like, hey, I have an idea of how you should start off, and Becky has an idea of how you should start off. And unbeknownst to us, we had the same idea of how starting this off, and before we even talked. When we talk about energy poverty, right, there's a dissonance associated with the term poverty, right? The first image in most cases, generally speaking, is there's a poverty that's associated with a third world or a developing economy, not necessarily the United States. But to set context for this discussion, there's 3 key data points that I think really level sets that would provide Becky and Mike the opportunity to discuss what they've been working on. So first data point, 34 million Americans reported difficulty paying their energy bills in 2024. For context, if you add up the populations of New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, and Phoenix, that's 24 million people. Let that settle in there for a quick second. Second data point, 22 million people, Americans, were behind their bills in 2024, their energy bills. That's 1 out of 6 households. Last data point, 1 out of 4 households experienced a power outage that lasted longer than 6 hours in the United States last year. So when we talk about energy poverty, we really cannot necessarily just associate it with the broader developing world. We have an issue in the United States today. And so Mike, I'll kick it off to you. You, like Becky, you have a very interesting story of how your messaging, your advocacy, your work really incorporated energy poverty, and explain what you're doing with it today.
Yeah, so thank you, Drew, for inviting me up here, especially being on stage with Becky, which I greatly admire, and Dan Pickering has helped us a bunch at Howard Energy. My story is a little unique in that I was the president of a very large infrastructure company, Fortune 100 company, and left that publicly traded company to start a private company. And that was in 2011. And in the last 14 years, what we've experienced is a $6 natural gas price in the U.S. to a $2 natural gas price. We've seen $120 oil, you've seen negative $38 oil. You've seen a doubling, Secretary mentioned, a doubling of natural gas production in the U.S. in that time period, and you've seen a tripling of oil production. And the narrative, as my name is on the door of a large infrastructure company, was that our business is going away. And I had to get conviction that energy is the most important thing. It's the business that powers every other business. It's also the foundation of life. I did not have that terminology when I started Howard Energy Partners. I wanted to start a meaningful endeavor, and I wanted to build infrastructure because that's what I'd always done. I've only worked in energy since college. And so I didn't have a higher purpose around energy. And it was through that exploration that I discovered how the world really works. Even as a chemical engineer, I did not have an appreciation of how the world actually survived and thrived. And once I did research, and that's what led me to meeting Chris Wright all the way back to 2018. And as he was out talking about energy to anywhere from the House of Lords over in London to Congress to other people, the way he talked was he didn't use the words ESG. He didn't use the words climate. He used the words human flourishing. He used the words bettering human lives. That was fascinating to me. And it was through inspiration of guys like him, Dr. Scott Tinker, Dr. Mark Mills, Alex Epstein, Michael Schellenberger, that I started getting into understanding. And if I got it wrong, as an energy executive with a chemical engineering background, and I wasn't able to articulate the importance of energy, how could I expect anybody else to? So what we've done is we've now realigned the purpose of our company to deliver positive energy. We're one of the largest midstream companies in the U.S. We started last year a CEO Energy Poverty Summit, which Becky was nice enough to speak at. What that means is to get more CEOs in the energy business to talk from a higher purpose standpoint about what we're actually doing out there. We all talk our book and about how great our business is, but really what we're doing is not only providing our allies energy that they need to flourish, we're providing our communities power to flourish. And if you want to question what bad education will do, just look to Texas as the largest energy producer, and we don't have enough electricity to sustain the economic growth that we're going through. And in 2021, we ran out of electricity in the middle of winter. And so bad energy thinking leads to bad energy policy, which leads to more people struggling. And our goal is to, and today I'm here as a board member of Energy Corps with our stated goal to end energy poverty on the planet in the next 50 years. And so we could talk more about Energy Corps later, but that's kind of a background of how I got to where I'm here today.
No, it's perfect. And just as Mike said, I've known Mike for quite some time now. I'm always fascinated and obviously very encouraged with how he presents the industry. I've recently was introduced to Becky, and I was joking that she actually got me in trouble with Mrs. Romito, because every Saturday we're supposed to watch like a Netflix show or whatever, and of course, my wife's not here to defend herself. The show that she picked was just terrible. I was like, okay. So I got really into this podcast, that Past, Present, Future of Texas Energy that Becky put on, and she's got a litany of material that she's released, and I encourage everyone here to look at it and to review it. But just as Mike and just as Drew alluded to, your background is nothing short of fascinating. So can you kind of give the Cliff Notes version of how you got into the seat?
Sure. And hopefully the audience will associate me with the bad Netflix.
That's right. It's like, oh, you're the woman that got Dan in trouble. There's more to that story.
My professional career started right here in Washington, D.C. I was a policy wonk and a political junkie, worked a couple presidential campaigns in the White House, U.S. Senate, federal agency, ran for Congress, recovering regulator, lobbyist, lawyer. So my husband tends to call me a bottom dweller in the lowest form of humanity, but and not, anybody who has any of those experiences, my apologies. But I went back to Texas and pseudo-rehabilitated myself and have been in corporate business, started my own advisory services and consulting company for the last, 17 years that I've had that, and I'm an investor and entrepreneur, and so life has been good, and I also sell wine.
Second largest? No.
Pardon?
Second largest winery?
Well, as a matter of fact, Drew was ever so close, but there's a 30-mile strip in Texas that is the second most popular wine trail in the nation after Napa Valley. You wouldn't believe it, but it's in Texas.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mike, one of the things that I really like about how you present, you, to your credit and to Secretary Wright's point, you're very agnostic politically when it talks about energy. It's the math is the math, the physics is the physics. One of the other things that I marvel at in terms of how you present is the very distinct choice of language that you select, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier. With the net zero energy poverty by 2050, right, that is sometimes construed as, that is a, you're punking, if you will, the net zero by 2050, and that could be anything but the truth. Can you talk about what goals you've established and how you incorporate the language and sort of the KPIs and the strategy associated with how you educate the broader general public on what the economic realities of energy are and how we can solve very complex problems when we're smart and pragmatic about the policies we put in place?
What a great question. What's hard to talk in an elevator with somebody or to talk at a level, what we've learned through studying communication is, you have to speak at a 5th grade level where they can consume it and everybody has a chance of hearing it. We don't come at it from an adversarial standpoint. We don't think it's constructive to come at things from a black and white standpoint, especially when it comes to energy, where the myth of an easy energy transition was the narrative in the last decade. And the most popular political standpoint was the rapid elimination of fossil fuels. And when you look into the math and the physics of what we're doing on the planet, we have never used less energy of anything ever. We broke records last year in coal. We broke records last year in oil, natural gas. We haven't broke records in nuclear, but we're going to because 55 nuclear plants are under construction right now in a lot of places besides the U.S. And so when you understand that GDP is thermodynamically tied to energy usage, and those areas of the world that use more energy have better lives. They have the cleanest water, the most educated populace, the least infant mortality. And once you start tying those two together, it's hard to disconnect that. And you can still hold climate in that narrative, but it has to be after human flourishing and humans are doing okay. If you tell humans that you have to do more with less, which we haven't figured out a way to do because we don't know how to replace jet fuel, we don't know how to replace diesel fuel, we don't know how to replace these things that we've invented, we haven't evolved past that yet. And while we spend money on innovation, we're one of the largest hydrogen producers, say, in Corpus Christi right now, Howard Energy is. But for traditional hydrogen purposes, we don't know exactly how to do those at an industrial scale, at a major macro scale. We don't know how to do cleaner things, and there's going to be a time frame to that innovation. We sped that up too quickly, and so it's nice to see now the government understanding that a little bit. It's nice to see Bill Gates' narrative now putting humans at least on the same playing field as climate. It's nice to see some of those things happening today, because I think that leads to better, more rational policy, and not just the black and white narrative that we've had over the last decade.
Right, and then Becky, with Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute, y'all have also done a very good job of just laying out the economic realities of today and then providing solutions as well. In terms of the similar question that I asked Mike, explain to the audience of how, or the long-term goal of that institute, and what are the major issues that you're trying to address.
Sure, Dan. And foremost, the way you started us out today was just ever so important and primal in this conversation, because in order to project power abroad, we need to be strong here at home. And we have work to do, obviously, the way you couched that. And certainly, we're, Mike and I, Texas proud, but there's energy poverty in Texas. And as Mike looks at energy poverty in developing countries, it looks very different from what we have across the United States. That's in developing countries, it's access to electricity, and in the US, it's financial access. So, however, having said that, the implications, the impact, and the consequences are very similar. It is decreased physical health, decreased emotional health, increased isolation, increased mortality, and so we're suffering that too. So the TEPRI is 10 years old this year. And so what have we been doing for the last 10 years? Basically, we've been doing three things. Number one, and most fundamentally, is research. We're researchers. And we've been gathering data, curating that data, analyzing that data, so we have a good understanding about what is energy poverty, how do you measure energy poverty, how does it behave, where is it located, what's the magnitude? And so with that kind of comprehension, then we're able to start thinking about, what are some energy solutions to be able to alleviate that? And those solutions need to be accepted by the market, impactful, and scalable. So that's a challenge. And the other thing that TEPRI has been over the last 10 years, besides researchers, is two other things. Conveners, we're bringing together non-traditional partners and an ecosystem of companies and people that touch the energy poverty spider web. And I call it a spider web. It's such an apt analogy because in the core of it is your root causes of energy poverty. Poor quality housing stock. You have, inflation and lack of innovative financing mechanisms. Maybe lack of technology, and that's starting to change, and look forward to talking about that. And that spider web grows because of the different impacts that it has on different people and households in so many different ways, whether it is, getting to work, whether it's setting your temperatures at unhealthy temperatures in the house, whether it is having to forgo certain necessities that you otherwise would need, like medical and clothing and certain food items and so forth. So it's a spider web of things. The tensile strength of that spider web is strong. So once you're in energy poverty, it's really hard to get out of it. And so we convene different people with diverse backgrounds and experiences to have a shared understanding, a unity of purpose. Our board reflects that, and I think we're much stronger together with that. And one other thing that TEPRI that is really going to be the focus of the future in the next 10 years is entrepreneurs. By that I mean we've already developed certain tools for utilities to be able to do things more efficiently and effectively related to low-income households connecting to energy efficiency programs and other programs. We are working with one of the largest utilities in the nation on a virtual power plant. We're partnering to do resilient hubs in certain communities. And that's just the beginning. We want to focus on creative financing. We want to focus on partnering with some other tech companies that I'd love to mention later. And so that's where our future is going. Much like you saw in Drew's video, we're trying to find reach, influence, and making the research and data actionable.
I mean, that sort of plays into why I think I'm so impressed with Drew and C3's message, where this bottom-up entrepreneurial spirit, free markets, solve problems. Mike, you're the personification, like you are a real-life example. I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe you talked about your background, but one of the things I really appreciate about the entrepreneurial mindset is, the conversation can get depressing really, really quick. Like we spit out some really depressing, some very eye-opening statistics. But entrepreneurs look at that and like, what's the opportunity? Like, how do I solve this problem? How do I incorporate my capitalist mentality into not only making money, but solving this problem? So from that standpoint, if we want to get a little bit more optimistic, as Secretary Wright always corrects everybody on, like, look at the positive on this. What are the opportunities that you see ahead and how are you addressing them?
So one of the very first pipelines we bought was 6 miles from the Mexican border. The largest natural gas producing county in the U.S. is in Webb County near Laredo, Texas, believe it or not. The largest natural gas consuming region of Latin America is Monterrey, Mexico. It's about 200 miles apart. To connect those 200 miles, we as a young company, this is starting back in 2012, when the Mexican government ran on energy reform, and we were starting our meaningful endeavor. And what a great way for us to connect our gathering system that's 6 miles from the border to Monterrey, Mexico. Mexico does not have the regulatory infrastructure that we do. At that time, the U.S. had about, let's call it a little over 2.6 million miles of pipelines. The country of Mexico had 25,000 miles of pipelines. So to lay 200 miles of pipeline was quite the adventure. But we knew that if we could get more energy to Mexico in that particular region, nearshoring was already happening and wanting to happen more power plants were being built. There was a middle income range of people coming up in that particular region of northern Mexico. We said, we have got to do this. In 3.5 years, in about, and I'll give you an equivalent basis, about $1 billion, we got that pipeline, and today that pipeline is completely full. It's about 10% of the natural gas going to Mexico. Mexico is the largest natural gas consumer of the United States of America. To put that into context and how an entrepreneur stepped into that role, we've seen now Amazon-sized warehouses and factories going into Mexico. There's more economic flourishing in that portion of Mexico than other energy poverty portions of Mexico. So we've seen a great result from us putting our ingenuity to work. To contrast that and what you heard the Secretary talk about on permit reform in the U.S. and how difficult it is, we own pipelines in the Northeast in Pennsylvania. Our project in Mexico, we had a final investment decision about the same exact date as a pipeline between West Virginia and Virginia, about the same distance, about the same size. We got ours built between two countries for $1 billion in 3.5 years. It took 10 years and $10 billion to get the one flowing between West Virginia and Virginia. It's called Mountain Valley Pipeline. Look it up. So the regulatory regime I was dealing with in a foreign country was almost more friendly, and I was able to get stuff done versus building pipelines between two states. And so energy poverty is not going to get solved by just talking about it, and it's not a technological problem. It's literally a regulatory issue and a judicial issue on how to, and this is every country we talk to, whether it be Argentina, Mexico, or places in Africa that we visit with through Energy Corps. The regulatory overlay of what's going on from an energy perspective definitely restricts energy access to people, and we would love to educate more people on the importance of energy to lift some of those regulations.
And you bring up a really good point, the dichotomy, or I guess the mutually exclusive, dynamic between federal and state. When we hear permitting reform, people just think of like permitting reform. There's the federal and the state. And I know you've done a lot of work and you have a lot of writings and a lot of perspective on the variety of policy changes that have to be done. But if we are going to separate federal and state, how should the audience think about what policy changes have to be done?
At the state level?
At both.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a variety of things at the federal level, starting with the Congressional Act of Permitting, as we've heard before. And so, I think actually that's what I want for Christmas. We should all be writing Santa Claus for permitting reform. And, I didn't say which Christmas, though.
Right.
But we've all been good, so we deserve it. But I think also just a baby step in the right direction is something very specific and tangible is weatherization program and LIHEAP. So LIHEAP, for example, is based on income eligibility, 200% of the federal poverty level. And so when you look at that threshold, there are going to be people that are included that really aren't eligible in a pure sense, and people that are eligible that may not be included. So if we can, in the age of AI, really do some hard targeting about eligibility for both LIHEAP and weatherization, which is more of a state block grant indirect program, that would help a lot. So being able to target those energy burdens, zip codes first, manufactured housing, rental stock, areas where funding there would provide the highest amount of savings is a good place to start on the federal level.
And then do you view that as an untapped opportunity, or are
Yes.
you, okay, can you expand upon that?
Yeah, I think, it's been in place for a long time with little reform. And it just needs to be contemporized a bit and relooked, because now we have the tools that we can actually parse and customer segment with a little bit more data and understanding. And I think the dollars, because they're finite, would spread a lot more and also make a higher impact if we do that.
No. And then Mike, just for context, you started Howard Energy Partners in what year?
Yeah, under Obama in 2011.
Okay, and then how many employees did you have in 2013?
I probably had 40 employees then.
How many employees do you have today?
450.
Okay, so to provide that context, so in two administrations, arguably, you grew that business from X to Y. When we're talking about, and you sort of alluded it to, how does Howard Energy Partners, assuming you want to do this, go from 400 employees to 800 employees from a policy standpoint? Like, what has to be implemented for you to grow that business the way that you want?
Yeah, so our stated goal is to, we're going to double in size in the next 5 years by design. And that's going to be primarily through natural gas transportation, primarily through LNG export. It's going to be through increase in natural gas usage because electricity needs, because of data centers. It's something that everybody in this room, I'm sure, has read about, heard about, every conversation you have in anywhere at a state level or federal level. And what we find as an infrastructure builder is I am supported by a large pension fund out of Alberta, Canada. Another large investor of mine is the University of Texas Endowment Funds, one of the largest university endowments in the U.S. Those are my direct investors. Very long-term thinking, very risk-averse type investors. If we're going to be investing people's pension money or college endowment money, we can't do it without surety. And capital projects follow surety. I'm not going to risk building another Mountain Valley pipeline if I'm $1 billion deep of buying pipe, engineering, buying right of way, and it's going to take 10 years of that capital sitting there with no return. That's just not the way any investor invests. And so we don't chase projects that are not, that there's some surety tied into it. So what we advocate for in Washington and even at a state level, depending on what state we're talking about, if it's Pennsylvania, say, where we have pipelines, is that the activists that come in, the permitting is actually okay. It's the lawsuits you receive because the activists actually sue the federal government. They sue staff at FERC. They sue everybody along the way to just grind the project to a halt. And so while, just to give you some numbers, you heard Drew say that, I built one of the first 42-inch high-pressure natural gas pipelines in Texas, the largest pipeline in Texas. This is back in 2006. We did that project in under 2 years. We built in the U.S., all of us, we built over 500,000 miles of pipelines in the last 20 years. And we only have 3 million miles today. So we built from 2.5 to 3 million miles in the last 20 years under this permitting regime. What has grinded it to a halt is the lawsuits and the weaponization of NEPA. And so what we're advocating for is to get back to building, get back to doing what we know how to do. I was on stage a couple weeks ago here in DC where a head of a union organizer was on stage with me and a politician from Georgia. And we're all saying the same thing. How can they train welders and craftsmen, which we desperately need in the U.S.? We have a desperate shortage of blue-collar workers. If there's no assurity that I can actually contract with someone to build infrastructure. We build power plants. We build pipelines, export facilities. How can I hire their folks, union folks, if I have no assurity? So we need to figure out ways through regulation to eliminate nuisance lawsuits, the weaponization of regulation and that sort of thing so we can build more infrastructure. And I don't think that's a DNR issue. We try to transcend politics. Yeah. And I love Secretary's idea to get politics out of it. Unfortunately, it's in it and it's stopping infrastructure right now.
Yeah, it was interesting. And we were having this conversation. I gave a presentation to the American Foundries Association and, almost ignorantly, I made the comment like, y'all must be very relieved to have this administration in. And they're like, okay, like what's the hesitancy? It's the uncertainty associated with once they get the bid done, like will this thing see the end of it? And they're optimistic from it. But, Becky, from your standpoint, Secretary Wright talked about a lot of the things that they're working on. Based on what he said and based on what you observed, what are a couple of things that gets you most excited about how this administration is looking at the energy industry and then the energy ecosystem? Well,
a couple of things. Number one, he mentioned inflation, and inflation and electricity prices are highly correlated. And so I'm really glad this administration is so focused on inflation going forward. That's really important. EIA had just published their short-term energy outlook, and they're actually forecasting that in the next 2 years, electricity rates are going to be higher than inflation for the next 2 years. Back in our homestead in Texas, TEPRI has just published in the last week an affordability paper of what the forecast looks like for electricity rates in competitive areas of Texas over the course of the next 5 years. And whereas in the last 4 years, like the Secretary had mentioned, we've increased electricity rates by almost 30%. Well, guess what? In Texas, over the course of the next 5 years, not accounting for inflation, it's expected that we'll increase electricity rates about 29%. So it's interesting because starting before 2020, we had really stable rates across the entire nation, even below the average in Texas. But since 2020, we've all got caught with our pants down. One, because of reliability issues, COVID, supply chain, inflation, and then in Texas and other parts of the nation, it's been national disasters that we all have to recoup through our electricity rates. So it's for the near term, it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. But like you said, Dan, it's opportunity for entrepreneurs, and that's the exciting thing because that's really where America's strengths lie.
Right, and then one of the interesting things is I'm working on a couple projects. Texas in of itself, right? If it was its own country, is projected to be the 5th largest economy in the world by 2040. Like that is a thing. If you look at all the migration, whether it's jobs, investment, just population, you see Texas as this blossoming economy. What is sometimes frustrating, and by the way, Mike didn't get me and Becky's memo about the boots, right?
And I'm the 7th generation Texan,
One of the things that I get a little bit frustrated with is the environmental profile of Texas is something that is misunderstood, in my opinion, right? If we're talking about decarbonization and we're talking about emissions management, the gentleman had a question about European regulation. If you just look at a chart and you look at emissions in Texas, it is a ski slope, right? There has been vast innovation and incredible technologies created to ensure that the emissions profile of those individuals operating businesses in Texas has gone down. So my question to you, Mike, we were talking about this 6-7 years ago, even right as COVID was coming along. Do you think Texas serves as the model to follow, not necessarily just from a policy or an innovation standpoint, but also from an environmental record?
Yeah, so when you look at the energy production of Texas, we send today about, just to give you some numbers, and sorry, I'm a nerd about this, but the U.S. produces about 105 BCF a day of natural gas. Texas produces over a quarter of that. What's interesting about that is 15 BCF actually leaves Texas on LNG ships, and another 6 BCF leaves Texas to Mexico. So Texas is sending a ton of natural gas to our allies and friends. We drill over 5,000 wells a year. There's not another state that comes close to us. That means we frack 5,000 wells a year. That means we put up 5,000 tank batteries, we lay pipelines, we do all this. We think Texas is a model, obviously, because we've been doing that for 100 years in Texas. And Texas does okay economically, clearly. We attract a lot of business to Texas. We think if other states, I was speaking in Colorado this year, Colorado drilled 500 wells last year, and they're trying to drill less this year. When they have budget surpluses, or opposite of a surplus, they have budget deficits because as they were restricting oil and gas production, they are increasing their deficits, have no way to pay for their schools and roads and that sort of thing because tax revenue is declining there because of oil and gas production. Texas had massive surpluses last year. The oil and gas industry did over $24 billion in tax revenue to the state last year. And then when you look at the environmental standpoint of Texas, clean waters, clean air, lower emissions, because we don't want to send our methane to the atmosphere. We get paid for methane. So we want to continue to improve technology to keep methane in the pipes. We're constantly working on innovations to do that. And so I think, obviously I'm biased, 7th generation Texan, I'm a 1st generation oil and gas person, but I think we're a great example of how you can produce massive amounts of energy. We also lead the nation by far in wind energy. We have more industrial solar than anybody in the country, including California. So we lead in oil, gas, wind, solar. So we know how to produce energy in Texas. I think that's another great example. We have some problems with the grid that Becky can highlight on why our electricity is still the most expensive in the South from a residential standpoint, but that has to do more with other things. We produce a lot of energy in Texas. So I think it's a great example of how to incorporate not only new technologies, but also live with existing technologies.
Yeah, and you sort of beat me to the punch, Becky, to Mike's point on the grid. Can you outline sort of like the top 2 or 3 issues, but how Texas is anticipating to address those and fix them so for over the long term?
Sure, and just to preface that, you mentioned Texas being misunderstood. What's incredible about Texas is, like Mike has emphasized, that it's so strong in oil and gas and feeds the world. But at the same time, it's the premier state for clean energy. So today, 60% of the capacity, meaning the megawatts in the ground, come from renewable energy. Solar, wind, battery, nuclear, hydro. In the queue, waiting to interconnect, 80% of the megawatts in the queue waiting to interconnect are solar and battery, if you could believe that. Now, is all that going to get done? No, but that's what wants to come to the fore. And so the issue with Texas is that we really are a great place to do business as far as regulatory reform and free market system, and that's what Drew and Nick have been preaching for a while. Free markets or clean markets. We're a testament to that, but at the same time, we went way over here. The pendulum was way over here. We're just needing to get it back in balance. Think of your personal financial portfolio. We always want to be perfectly hedged. We're never going to quite be there, but that's, central limit theorem. We're always trying to find equilibrium, and that's what we're trying to do. So Texas is now offering some low-income loans for dispatchable baseload power and other mechanisms like that. So we're doing that because the volatility of the grid is great when there's, as the Secretary had mentioned, there's these erratic resources that affect it. And I tell you what, clean power is really saving Texas some meaningful amount of money. But we need to find that equilibrium, and that's where it's at. So it doesn't mean that you're condemning one over the other. It's just how do you make sure that they're perfectly complemented? So in order to have stable, resilient grid.
Yeah, and just to put a data point to that, I know, raise your hand in the audience, who's watched Landman? Come on. Okay, who saw come on, everyone's lying, more people have seen it than that. Who saw the sort of the diatribe Billy Bob gives when it comes to wind, of course. All right, 26% of the energy mix in Texas is wind, right? So the numbers justify and back up what Mike and Becky are saying. We have about 10 minutes left. We've covered a variety of material. Why don't we open it up to questions? Sir.
So there's should I go to the mic or?
We can hear you. I'll repeat the question.
Sure. So there's a great study from the Pacific Research Institute that looked at the competitive versus the regulated markets in the United States. Just came out a couple of years ago. And it showed that the competitive markets are reducing prices faster, that they have shorter blackout periods, so they recover faster, that they also are decarbonizing faster and generally are outperforming the regulated markets on every factor that you can measure them on. So why should we be complacent about saying that, we're just going to accept that we are going to continue to have regulated markets? Why not have this administration use its ability to disrupt and change the Overton window to address this and say, look, if we're going to really have America leadership in energy innovation, we need to have free markets across the country. And we need to stop subsidizing monopoly energy generators and markets and giving them a free ride. How about addressing that? And do you agree that competition is really essential for energy leadership?
Becky, why don't you take that?
Okay, so,
Pass the mic.
in a prior life when I was a regulator, I always said that even on my best day, I couldn't regulate as well as a free market, competitive market could. The simple answer to your question, so why don't we, encourage that everywhere, is because it's painful. It's painful to deregulate and restructure. And it's not in our, as we're irrational human beings, we often don't have enough faith in just the law of supply and demand. You would think, well, why not? Because, we've been living with that law for, a century, but not having enough faith in the law of supply and demand. And so even in Texas, we have to always come back to that North Star and trying to figure out that we don't overdo mechanisms and come back to the faith. And, it's painful because, and Mike lives this, because he's deregulated. He's talk about a free market. So there are the times when you're in the ditch and you got to crawl out of that ditch if you haven't already prepared for the ditch. And there's a lot of innovation that comes with it, but it's hard.
Yeah, so I'm a free market capitalist. I will always argue for free market capitalism. And as I've dug into wanting to lower electricity costs in Texas and increase reliability in a straight up free market where no human or organization is responsible for reliability. We're having problems. We in 2021 we ran out of electricity in Texas, and even with some of the changes that we have in Texas, we're still at risk of having the same event happen. If we have like a 2011 event, not a 1 in 100 event like 2021 was, but like a 1 in 10 event like 2011, we may not have enough dispatchable power. And how do we get there? We are the most energy-rich state in the country, and the state is having to provide low-cost loans to incentivize dispatchable power construction. What I've learned, this is just me speaking of studying this issue the last 2 years, is I'm trying to build a 327 megawatt dispatchable plant in Corpus Christi near one of our large industrial facilities, is that the power market right now in Texas does not allow entrepreneurs to make a rate of return on their investment. And you're thinking like, how is that possible in the state of Texas? It's because no one's responsible for reliability, and dispatchable and non-dispatchable power gets paid the same. And so I am becoming to believe that there needs to be some form of regulation put into the system to ensure reliability and ensure that dispatchable power gets paid not by state dollars, but by entrepreneurs able to get revenue in a system to provide resilience to the grid. And so like I'm in this weird position right now going, am I actually for more regulation in electricity markets? Because no politician will allow electricity price to get high enough to meet market demand. So in 2021, when market prices went to, $9,000 a megawatt, immediately politicians step in to lower the price of electricity to consumers, which disincentivizes fixing the problem. The concept of a free market is the price has got to just reach whatever it gets to. You're going to build more supply, so it lowers the price. But we can't build faster than politicians can make the rules, and so they put a cap on pricing, and then nothing gets built. And that's precisely what's happened in Texas. So it's not as simple as free market versus regulated. There's something in between where reliability is still important, because even in foreign countries, giving somebody solar and wind without reliability is not what anybody wants. People want energy 24 hours a day. Oh, sorry, that was a long.
No.
There's solutions coming. We'll talk later.
I love it.
But I'll add to that. I think when we say the term regulation, right, there's different forms of regulation, right? There's different buckets. I think the last administration put in place regulation that preemptively selected winners. The regulation, in my opinion, that we need is a set of rules that basically gives the sandbox, the rules of the playground for participants to compete against each other within. So I don't think we just say we need less regulation, we need more regulation. It's we need the right regulation to be implemented to facilitate a vast competition amongst a variety of really competent people.
I love that.
I just came up with that, yeah.
Just to make sure I understand you, a competitive market like Texas is still better than a regulated market.
100%.
Weeks, right?
Right, 100%. Right, and I think the other thing too, and once again, I don't want to go on the diatribe, we'll go to the next question. We allow perfection to be the enemy of good. No one's going to score 100 on this.
It's hard.
It's really, really difficult. I'll take an A-.
There's trade-offs.
Yeah, there's a trade-off for everything. That's perfectly put. Next question. Yes.
Oh no, this is a hard one.
Uh-oh.
Hey everyone, I'm Joniel Cha with Google, and really appreciate the discussion, Becky and Mike, on power generation, policy, regulatory, market reforms. Wanted to ask your comments around transmission and distribution and power infrastructure, if any. And then another question, given what Secretary Wright mentioned during the opening session remarks, any other questions or comments you would relate to him or DOE-related entities based on what you have covered on energy affordability? Thank you.
Becky, you want to go T&D?
Sure. So, you mentioned state regulatory issues, and that's one thing that I think every state regulatory body needs to be looking at, and most of them are, and that is transmission planning and transmission interconnection for speed to power. but also distribution interconnection, because not only are there large loads of various flavors and forms coming on the transmission side of the house, but there's new technologies that are coming on the grid for residential and small commercial customers that are really exciting out there, that are going to save, like, I can name a couple of them, but you know, the reason they're important, and it's important for states to do this, is because the distributed energy resources of the world, the virtual power plants of the world, the microgrids of the world, they're located closer to the load. So you forego some of the transmission costs, you forego, depending on where you're sited, some of the demand charges, and it's also delaying and tolling the amount of upgrades on the grid that you have to do. So it's a triple win. So that means that state regulators really need to usher in and put the red carpet out for that. And Texas is starting to do that. They've been behind the 8 ball as well, and they're starting to turn the corner, but it's been push and pull. So the other thing I would say that goes to your question is, on the utility side of the house, what I've seen over and over and over again that really hampers energy poverty as well is lack of transparency and inefficiency. And so if we only had some dynamic work designs in utilities, and this is not something that should be legislated, it's not something that should be regulated, it needs to be that level 1 CEO that looks like Mike, that looks internally for cost engineering and making sure that there is efficiencies put in place, there's transparency so that the customer, whatever size customer, has a dashboard as to what the process looks like from A to Z and can understand where they are in the process at any given time in real time, that the process is mapped accurately, and that business units are realigned so that people are working together more effectively. Because what I see over and over again is a lot of ghosting. And you'll email and then you don't hear anything back, and you think, God, that was a great meeting, everything was going fine, I had put and then you don't hear anything. And it's not just for a week, it's not just for a month, it's for months, guys, and that is just so unacceptable in America today.
Should have left a little bit more time for Q&A. We have 10 seconds. I'll leave the audience with this. If you have the chance to look at the work that Mike releases on the Howard Energy website and the work that Becky releases on her variety of websites, please take the time to look at it. It's some of the most thoughtful pieces of work and educational material that you can get. With that, I want to thank the panelists, I want to thank C3. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to keep this thing rolling. My name is Nick Loris. I'm the Executive Vice President of Policy for C3 Solutions. And before I introduce the next panel, I want to give a couple shout outs for people who made this event what it is today. So there's a few members in the audience, Mark and Sam, who've done all of the backdrops, all of the promotional materials, have done a really good job on that. Our staff, we've had a great team here who have done a tremendous job making the room look like what it does today, especially Maggie Delahoyd. If you could give her a round of applause. She's made this incredible. She has a vintage shop in Alexandria. If you still need a Christmas present, head down to King Street. She would love to see you in the shop. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So, permitting reform, obviously, you can't have a conversation and an energy summit in DC without talking about permitting reform. And we've heard from Secretary Wright and the latest panel, there's a lot of motivated capital. There's a lot of interest. The interest in permitting reform has arguably never been higher than what it is right now, both in the states and at the federal government and within this administration. And importantly, we have a great panel today to talk about that. And so I'm pleased to have some of the thought leaders on Capitol Hill in the House of Representatives. We have Representative August Pfluger here representing the 11th District in Texas, as well as Representative Celeste Malloy, who is here from the 2nd District in Utah. And moderating this discussion is going to be Jeremy Harrell with ClearPath, and ClearPath has done a lot of good work on reg reform and permitting reform. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Drew and the C3 team for putting on an incredible event today to close out 2025. I'm excited to moderate today's discussion on what is the topic du jour in town, particularly this week, as the House is prepped to move a second wave of regulatory reform bills. And we have two members who have been at the forefront of this debate, advancing solutions that provide the regulatory predictability that we need in this country, not just today, but for the next 20 years. And so very grateful to have Congressman Pfluger and Congresswoman Malloy here, who are really driving forward on solutions. Before we get into the weeds of permit reform policy wouldn't matter if it isn't supporting the scale up and drive forward of technologies or energy in your states and in your districts. And so maybe just kind of start the conversation. What are you most excited about going on in your state? You know, your governors are leaning into this AI and energy moment, Governor Abbott and Governor Cox really pushing forward, and your districts are kind of in the forefront of it. And so maybe Congresswoman Malloy, would you start? What is most exciting to you in the great state of Utah?
Yeah, well, at the really fundamental level, I'm excited that everybody's talking about, producing more energy and permitting reform and how we can produce energy more efficiently. Governor Cox has Operation Gigawatt, his initiative to double the energy output from Utah, and that's fantastic. On a more granular level, we have geothermal research going on in Utah, where we have geothermal resources that can produce energy, but we've got research going on in the West Desert in Utah that'll help produce geothermal energy in other places that we haven't traditionally thought had hot enough resources. And if we can get to the point where we're producing geothermal energy in really landlocked places, they're using directional drilling technology from the oil and gas fields to figure out how to do geothermal where you have a large underground reach but a really small above ground footprint. That could be really helpful to a lot of places in the United States, even some of our foreign partners that don't have a lot of space but have some pretty drastic energy needs. I'm excited about that. And then even nuclear, small modular reactors, Utah's been really on the front edge of a lot of that research and welcoming to the idea of increasing our nuclear energy. And we're not Texas. People don't look at Utah and think, oh yeah, that's a big energy state. They look at us and think national parks and large diet sodas. But it's good to be getting into that conversation and showing people that you don't have to be Texas. You don't have to be a huge drilling state to be on the front edge of how do we produce more energy in this country. Everyone in this room knows we need to produce more energy. That groundwork's already been laid. But I think there are certain states that instantly come to mind, and Utah's not one of them, and we're elbowing our way into that.
I mean, geothermal, hot in both of your all states, and I think we're seeing major private sector momentum in that space. We're seeing a significant drive of investors into new innovative technologies, the Evers, the Fervos, the Zanskars of the world that are out there, and it's really exciting to see that take off, especially as the market's demanding affordable, reliable, zero-emission electricity. Congressman Pfluger, how about you? Texas, energy capital of this country, arguably. What is some of the stuff you're seeing on the ground over the last year or two that makes you most excited about Texas's energy leadership?
Well, it's great to be here with you, Jeremy. Thank you. And also with my colleague, Celeste Malloy from Utah, who's doing a great job. She's a friendly face at any energy discussion in the House that we have and puts a tremendous amount of work into, I know, some of the things that we'll specifically talk about on permitting. So it's great to be with you today. Texas is, I think, is a leader in innovation. And the district that I represent, that I'm fortunate enough to represent, includes the headquarters of the Permian Basin, Midland, and Odessa. And over the past 100+ years, That basin has been called dead multiple times, has helped us win World War II by the production of products, including the innovation of high-octane gas as a derivative from oil, and so many other things. But in the last 15 years has gone from producing less than 1 million barrels a day to now over 6 million barrels a day. Wow. And that was after it was called, extended or peak oil or whatever term was in vogue at that time. And that came from innovation. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is continued innovation. And at the same time that we've gone from 1 million to 6 million barrels, let me make it very clear, this is something that we talk about with the EPA all the time. Our emissions have come down over 35%. And that's just, that's almost impossible to do when you have a 6x increase in production of oil and a 35% reduction in harmful emissions. So when you think about the innovation, that really, yes, it's encapsulated in my district, it's encapsulated in the oil and gas side of this. I'm excited about our discussion today because it gets at the heart of what I'll call takeaway capacity, which we do not have enough takeaway capacity in this country. We don't have enough in the Permian Basin. We produce associated gas. So LNG is associated, natural gas is associated with the oil production. We have about 15% of the natural gas production, total US production. And I'm excited for permitting to happen, the reform to happen, to move at the speed of commerce to deliver that both domestically and to our allies and partners. And then in addition to that, there are a tremendous amount of data centers and a tremendous amount of just everything, businesses, manufacturing, you name it, chips and semiconductors and all sorts of things that are happening in Texas, and we need more electricity. And I think that the country that is deciding to do this right and that makes the investment environment easy to navigate, that you don't have to compete with Uncle Sam, you don't have to compete against a weaponized government, that's the country that's going to win, and we cannot afford to lose. We have to figure this out. We are at a moment right now, national security-wise, where all of these things that we are doing, our life depends on electrons. And I'm excited because I think Texas is leading in a lot of these, and in my district in particular is leading in these.
We're in a race with artificial intelligence. We're in a race to onshore manufacturing and drive American manufacturing renaissance in this country. We're in a race in things like space technologies, all that's going to require building new infrastructure in this country. And in many cases, energy is the long pole in the tent there. How has this era of rising demand, the increased attention on artificial intelligence and data centers changed the policy conversation that's happening within the U.S. House?
I know Celeste has a lot of thoughts on this, but there's been a lot of talk. We've had a lot of talk. There's been a couple of attempts. You saw the Barrasso Mansion attempt at the end of the last Congress. But I think people realize in a bipartisan way that we need more electricity, that there is going to be a surge in the demand from all the facets that you just mentioned. So there's a lot of talk about it, but then when you actually put pen to paper and you start figuring out where the negotiation space is, because I think the assumption based on our passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill in July is that many things that we want to do in permitting reform won't pass the Byrd Rule. Now we can have a separate conversation on whether they should or not. You probably know where I stand on that. I would love to have seen them pass the Byrd Rule and go through reconciliation, but they haven't, which means that a bipartisan bill is needed. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face today and this week when we're looking at the SPEED Act is that we know that there are certain things that have to happen. We know that that's going to mean that Republicans are going to be envious about protecting certain equities and likewise for Democrats. So how do we get that accomplished? There are conversations. I'd say that there's probably 2 or 3 thought leaders across the aisle that have stepped up to do this. And most of them realize that if we don't do this, that we're going to end up like Europe, where you can't build anything. You don't have pipelines and roads and bridges and highways and things that you need just to complete, what's needed, not to mention the national security issues that you just previously talked about.
Yeah, the current regulatory environment is not up to these challenges, and we've got to find a way to establish that regulatory predictability necessary to win those races. Congresswoman, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen change with the conversation is that we've broken out of some of our old paradigms. Like, we had this down, it was like a dance that we all did for a lot of years, where on our side of the aisle, we would talk about how we needed to build infrastructure, we needed permitting reform, we needed to be producing more energy, and on the other side of the aisle, they'd talk about how if we messed with the legacy environmental bills, then we were going to have the Cuyahoga River on fire and kids breathing toxic fumes, and we'd just kind of we'd go through the motion. We all knew the part we were supposed to play, and I think we've had a big paradigm shift as far as that goes. I am part of the Build America Caucus. It is bipartisan, and the whole idea is that we need to be able to build things in this country. And for too long, we've acted like we haven't learned anything as a nation or as policymakers since 1971. And that if we tweak anything, we're just going to go right back to where we used to be. And we did have some environmental problems that did need to be addressed. But we have arguably two whole generations who come of age in a regulatory climate where we have a different ethic around how we build infrastructure, how we do business, how we think of the environment. And during that same time frame, we have this regulatory climate that's built up around those environmental laws, and we keep adding patches. Every time we see something that's not working, we never strip it back down to the bones and say, this is what the Clean Air Act said, this is what the Clean Water Act said, this is what NEPA was intended to do. And we've had a lot of things build up on it since then. We just keep adding another patch. And so we have sort of this Franken environment where the bones of those legacy environmental statutes are still there, but they're kind of hard to find now. Almost all of what people in this room are probably dealing with when you're trying to do projects or policy is the rules and the regs that have come out of 2 generations now of federal agencies and lawsuits and everything else that's part of the federal environment. And what I'm excited to see right now is we're kind of stripping it back down to the bones. And by we, I'm including the court in that. Shout out to the Supreme Court for recognizing this. It was time to overturn the Chevron case. It was time for the 7 counties decision out of Utah about what the extent of NEPA should be. It's time for Congress to go look at how these are actually working in the real world and make some decisions about what needs to be changed. And we're not going through the same partisan talking points every time that we have been going through for years. We're actually getting down to brass tacks. And it's going to be a little bit messy. It was never going to be easy. There are still going to be times when we start to make progress and then people get a little panicky and they back up. And we're just going to have to keep going and going as we get through all of that, because we can build things in this country without destroying our environment. We can make good environmental decisions. I'm getting so excited now I can't say the words. We can make good environmental decisions quicker and cheaper than we've been making them. And there's broad buy-in to that now. I don't have to do the same work to convince people of that I used to do. That's kind of the starting point now. And that is a really exciting change that'd be easy to miss. We're all busy striving all the time, trying to get things done. I know there are people in this room that are trying to get projects permitted. There are people in this room who are looking for certainty on investment. There are people in this room who write about these things. And all of us can kind of start at a new ground zero of it's time to take a look at all of this and see what's working, what's not. And we need to have certainty and we need to go faster. And we used to have a lot of work to do just to get to that point. So it actually is a really exciting moment. It just doesn't look that exciting because we're all still going about our daily lives doing our things.
Congressman, you mentioned the 7 counties case and the Chevron ruling, some of these landmark judicial decisions that really put into question the scope, 7 counties, particularly on NEPA and what are the bounds that we're looking there. How do you see that impacting the motivation for you all to act at the congressional level and the importance of bipartisan congressional action that exceeds any political administration or any political configuration?
August is going to have a much more polished and a better answer to this than I'm going to. I keep telling my constituents, I feel like the court is saying, I dare you, to Congress over and over. They're reminding us that we are the legislative branch, and when the executive branch gets out too far on rules and regulations and the system bogs down, it's our job to go in and fix that. And they keep reminding us of that. With Chevron, they said they don't owe any deference to agencies. We don't owe any deference to agencies. We're the ones who are supposed to be overseeing them. With the 7 counties case, they reminded us that we wrote NEPA. And by we, I mean, people before I was born. But the legislative branch wrote NEPA and said that agencies have to look at alternatives before they make a decision. What it's turned into is a boondoggle for people like I used to be, lawyers who do permitting and have job certainty till the end of time, because there's always a technicality. But we've almost lost sight of the larger picture, which is that we wanted agencies to have good information when they made decisions. Now agencies are terrified to make decisions because there's always something. There's always a technicality. There's always a court that's willing to say, well, you probably should have spent more time on this. And the court keeps trying to refocus us on, go do your job. Act like you're the legislative branch. We're supposed to be a lot more powerful than we've been acting like we are in this space for a long time.
Congressman, how about you?
Yeah, it's a tale of two cities. Celeste is right. I think they do want us to do our job, to be specific. I think we got here, if you go back to the 1970s, in a way that was not nefarious. It was, let's let some of the experts at the agencies have a reasonable interpretation of what the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or any of the other intents of Congress were. And unfortunately, we've gone well beyond that.
Yeah.
And innovation depends on a return on investment. And if you can't have at least a reasonable chance of a return on investment, then no company, no individual is going to put capital towards a project that they know that there are factors other than their own success in demonstrating some scalable new innovation that are out of their control that they don't want to compete with, i.e. the regulatory environment. Why does it take 7 to 9 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, to complete a project that literally you could plan and build in 2 years? I mean, this is ridiculous for our country to have to endure something like that because one group, an activist group, can hold up a project. But that's what's happened here, and that's what we're trying to address in the SPEED Act. And I just think back to World War II when you're building things in these factories that we were building. I'm a pilot. We were literally building hundreds of airplanes a day. I don't think that we could even come close to doing something like that because of the regulatory environment that we find ourselves in. Yes, regulations are good. Haven't found anybody in industry that doesn't want some left and right boundaries.
Yeah.
But they also want to be able to compete with one of our main competitors, which is China, that is building new energy sources, namely coal plants, in order to do the things and service the needs of the rest of their manufacturing. We have to be able to compete with that, and I think that's why this conversation is so important. So the tale of two cities is, on one hand, you have a regulatory environment that says, I'm going to make you jump through every imaginable hoop and hurdle in order to prove that you have complied. What we are offering is the alternative. Let's get back to that it is assumed that your project is in compliance. It is assumed that when you do an environmental impact statement and an environmental review, that the facts are straight, we've done the due diligence, the public comment has been opened, and it's assumed that you comply and can move forward. And that, to me, is how we succeed in this country, and we've got to get back to that.
Amen.
Well, and sorry, I'm
Go
going
ahead.
to jump back in, but it captures the reality of we've done this before. So many of the things that we're trying to permit are almost routine. There's nothing novel anymore about building a power line or a bridge or a road, and even some types of power plants. We've done them before, but we act like every time it's brand new technology, no one's ever seen it, and if we don't have 35 different people in Washington, D.C. in different buildings looking at it, then we're probably going to melt the world down and everyone's going to die. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, and yet that's kind of the attitude we've had about permitting for a long time. And I come from a state with a lot of public land. And so we get a special level of dealing with the federal government on routine things. And, you know, something like running a grader over a dirt road that's been there for 100 years, we permit it like there's never been a road there before, no one's ever driven a grader before, and we don't know what the impacts are going to be. And it's just time to start treating routine things like they're routine and doing some enforcement. If there's a bad actor that doesn't comply, then the penalty should be such that there's no incentive to not comply. I mean, if somebody took a grader on a dirt road and drove out through a pristine wilderness, then we've got a problem, and the punishment should fit the crime. But we act like we've never built a bridge before, or and if we don't spend years analyzing the impacts, we're probably going to kill people. And 100 years ago, our forefathers had never built big dams and rivers before, and they figured it out. And the dams are holding, and they arguably won us World War II. And I think they would be shocked if they knew the kind of analysis we put into, routine maintenance on the things they built for us when it hadn't ever been done before.
Congresswoman, you've got legislation that tries to get directly at this, right?
Yes.
A bill that's focused on quote-unquote permit by rule, which means different things to different folks, but inherently it's about taking care of some of these routine items and having a checklist that allows you to kind of drive those forward in a more expeditious way. And then we can focus permitting in limited staff and permitting resources around the more complicated projects. You want to talk a little more about the bill?
Yeah, so the FREE Act tells agencies to go look at the permits they issue and which ones could be done as permit by rule. And if it qualifies for permit by rule, then we ask them to go do it that way. And states and local governments do this all the time. It's not a hard concept to explain to people. They instantly pick up on it. Agencies would have to say, this is what we require in order to issue a permit. And if you provide that, and everything's in order, then you get your permit. If you can't provide that and something's not in order, then the agency tells you what's missing, what you need to do to address that, and once you address it, then you get your permit. And then we do inspection and enforcement. So it doesn't give a pass to people who are trying to cut corners, but it makes it so that agencies, the one thing you always hear from agencies, I'm on the appropriations committee, we have people come in and justify their budgets, the one thing they always say, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough budget, we're being asked to do more with less. I think we should just ask agencies to do less. There are a lot of things they're doing that we just don't need them to do. And I think permit by rule would help take a lot of that pressure off. If you're doing something routine that they've done a lot of times before, they say, this is what we require for the permit, you do those things, they issue a permit. In my experience, when you're dealing with agencies that are really struggling to get something out the door, it's not always even nefarious. Sometimes you have someone there who's not sure. They don't feel confident that they know at what point they can sign on the dotted line. But they don't want their signature on something that the agency loses a lawsuit over. And so we've got this analysis paralysis going, where sometimes you have people who, for ideological reasons, are opposed, and they can drag their feet and make something take longer. And sometimes you've got people who just aren't sure what to do, and it's easier to let it sit on a desk than to take a risk. Saying no is almost always the safest route at a federal agency, and I'd like to turn that around, where we get people to a point where they know when to say yes, and they feel confident about saying yes when what they're doing is the right thing to do. And I'm hopeful that the FREE Act and permit by rule can do that, where even if you are on your third day in an agency, you can look at something and say, well, I know this is what we require for a permit, and you've given us all of that, so I can move this out the door. And I think it makes it so that we can use more technology, and AI can do some of that, going through checking things and making sure it's all there and it's all in order, so that the people at the desks are doing things we need people with expertise to do, and we're not paying a human and all of their benefits and time off to do something that a computer could do quickly, and we can reserve people for people things.
Makes a lot of sense. Congressman, you alluded to this a little bit earlier on the propensity of Congress to move things in bigger packages, right? Many of these policy solutions over the last 4 to 6 years have been in a larger, whether it's a reconciliation bill, an omnibus, the NDAA. the House is taking up the SPEED Act this week. They did a pipeline-focused bill that passed with bipartisan support last week. There are a lot of other ideas like the FREE Act out there that have gotten through committee and could be in play. As you think about next year, what does comprehensive permitting reform look like? What do you think the pieces of that need to be, and how does that interweave with what's going through the House this week?
Well, we'll start with exactly what my colleague from Utah, Celeste, was mentioning, just common sense. The agency shouldn't be in a default no position because that's the easy answer. And we need to give them some very clear guidance and parameters on what that looks like. I'd say secondly, how we get around judicial reform. And you talk to any industry or any company, and I'm sure there's lots of companies in this room. We can make this interactive if you want. But how many of you, just show of hands in the room, have been a victim or had a project slowed down because of lack of judicial reform, because the timelines took too long? Just show of hands on. I think when I'm talking to especially pipeline companies, people that are in the hydrocarbon business, those that are interested in building something, that this becomes something you can drag out, and you can go to court and you can sue and you can do things where you delay the project over and over and over again. And you can take the same suit to one agency and then go right to another agency after that. So that has to be a pillar. And what the SPEED Act is attempting to do is to start reforming that and have a burden of proof that really puts some common sense into it. And then I'd say, lastly, there's got to be a discussion with the states on, having the ability to maintain their character and state laws, but also a conversation on things like transmission, on things like telecommunications. It's not just pipelines from my district that I'm worried about, but there are lots of things, and it gets tricky because you get into the Northeast. Wouldn't it be nice in the Northeast where you've got the Utica formation and you have the Marcellus formation, where we could deliver American-produced natural gas to the Northeast instead of having to import it from another country, which is pretty much the case every year, where they're importing not Texas LNG, because we have some issues with the transport in the water, but we're talking about gas that's produced and pipelined up to the Northeast and used in a way where the cost comes down. So I'd say those are a couple of the main pillars of permitting, but it's doing things in a common sense way, ultimately, that brings the time back into a reasonable approach, where if you're going to take 9 years, no company wants to take that risk on whatever the project is. Just ask the people that the TransCanadian folks. Do I have any TC folks in the room on the XL pipeline? I mean, this is a perfect example of how our government basically expropriated a project that not only was approved, but it was also being built, and ended that. We have to get away from that. That's what third world countries do. And our country can't do that. We have to live by law and order, and we have to have a good process and have some trust that process is going to allow these projects to go forward.
Mm-hmm. The project predictability convo has kind of been front and center, was a major focus at House Resources, and the bill was moving forward, and it's a little bit of the conversation among the Republican conference as a whole this week, right? How do you all see about the ensuring that there is confidence in a government permit moving forward, and the kind of frustration that you all have been hearing from private sector entities about changing paradigms when administrations change, whether it's a focus on technology or a type of infrastructure?
So the SPEED Act actually directly addresses that. There's language in the SPEED Act to end that practice of, and I've lived it in real life, I'm sure everyone in the room has, where you've got a project and it's going along and you're hurrying as fast as you can to get things done before the end of an administration, because you have an administration that's friendly to whatever. Plug in what you're doing. Affordable housing, infrastructure, oil and gas pipelines, and then there's an election, and you get a new administration, and whatever record of decision you just got gets overturned, and now you know you've got 4 or 8 years of no progress on your project. And that is just not the way a developed country should work. And I was shocked as a freshman member of Congress traveling with the Natural Resources Committee. I was in Asia, and we had people in the governments there saying, we would like to be investing in US technologies, but you have to get your permitting problems figured out, because we can't get people to invest if they don't know when the project is going to get built. And I've been saying that for a long time, but being on foreign soil, hearing other countries saying that to us was kind of sobering. Like, this is no way to be a world superpower if we can't get things figured out and decide what we're going to build. And if we do, which I think we're going to, then it's not just that we can build projects faster here, but we can also develop technologies faster here that we can export that solve some of these problems in other countries. Some of our allies need the help too. And if we're not doing it, Russia and China will be. If we're developing technologies that meet our environmental standards, they're probably going to meet the environmental standards in the rest of the world. But if no one's investing here, we're not doing that. There are multiple layers of reasons for us to be getting our house in order, so to speak, so that we can play the role that we as Americans decided after World War II we're going to play in the world. We're not playing it very well at the moment because we internally have to decide who we want to be. Do we want to be a country that produces things and does them in a way that's environmentally friendly, cost-effective, and keeps the world a stable and safe place to travel and do business? Or do we want to stay here, punch each other in the face, and let somebody else be the world superpower and take over world influence? And we wake up one day and realize that we're beholden to a country that doesn't share our values because we stopped playing a role that we know how to play. We've played it, but we've kind of lost track a little bit lately.
Congressman.
Yeah, we have chosen the latter, Celeste, where
by default, yes.
Sat around and punched each other in the face and then realized that it's not fun doing business here at times. I'm working with a company that has a project in Mexico, and the project has basically been expropriated from this company. Billions of dollars that has gone down the tubes because they can't trust the government. And I think what we're hearing from industry, from you all, is that instead of having this administration to administration, executive order to executive order approach, put something in statute, codify it.
Yeah.
Write it in statute. The Supreme Court clearly ruled on one aspect of this with the Chevron deference ruling and said, we want you to be specific, we need you to be specific, and that's where statute comes in, where we should be directive on these things. And project certainty is the name of the game. I'm seeing it in West Texas every single day. It's not just pipelines. We're talking about a tremendous amount of work that's being done on these data centers. The small modular reactor game that Abilene Christian has partnered with Natura Energy, and a tremendous amount of work that's going in. And that's one project, and there's many of those across the country. But they have to have the certainty that when they get approved to do whatever it is, when you get approved to do whatever it is that you do best, that it can move forward and we can sell it. And that's the exciting part to me, is that if we get this right, our competitive advantage in this country is innovation.
Yeah.
And if we get this right, our GDP, especially on the expertise of exporting services and intellectual property that we know how to do, it's going to increase and be maximized in a way that I don't think we could ever even imagine. But now is the time to act. And we need y'all's help, because this is a really, really important week. And I'm sure you're going to get to the SPEED Act. I don't want to get ahead of you, but this is a very important week in Congress. And we still have some holdouts. When you do a bipartisan bill, it's not perfect. Not everything that I want is in that bill. And there are some things in that bill that I don't like. That's the nature of what we're trying to accomplish right now. And I would ask you, sincerely ask you, to put as much effort as you possibly can this week into bringing around, especially Republicans who have questions. This is a generational moment. We couldn't get it done during the Biden administration. Maybe another Democrat administration could get it done, but I don't think so. I think now is the time. I think this week is the time. And we need everybody's help in making the case that by passing this, it's one of the most important pillars that we'll get passed, and that we can get to the Senate and propose some of the things that make up real reform.
Couldn't agree more, Congressman. I mean, close at the end of last Congress. Obviously, you all tried hard to try to get it through the reconciliation process. This is the moment. It doesn't get any easier after the next election or the next administration. And to your point, it's a national security race. We're not only racing on these technologies, we're racing globally to attract capital. And so every month, year, we wait to try to find the right configuration to get something done. We're squandering time to lead on these technologies.
I was just going to mention it. Sorry, I was just going to mention, I'm chairman of the Republican Study Committee, 190 members, the largest caucus, the largest policy organization in Congress. And we have levied every resource we possibly can muster towards this effort to help the committees of jurisdiction, because it's not just one committee. I mean, you're basically dealing with 3 committees: ENC, TNI, Natural Resources. The Senate has their own committees of jurisdiction that don't exactly match what the House is doing. But this is so important that when we have our weekly lunches and our policy meetings, we are bringing together those committees so that our conference can be educated to pass this. This is a generational moment for us. This will not just affect us this year or the next year. You're talking 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Think about what the Clean Water and the Clean Air Act did 50 plus years ago, and we're there again.
Yeah, and to some extent, this is back to the paradigm thing I was talking about earlier, and that's why I really appreciate what August does with RSC and talking good policy. You know, at the end of the day, we have to do politics, but good policy makes for good politics. And some of what you're probably going to see play out with permitting reform in general and even specific bills is those paradigms we've kind of learned, where there are on one side of the aisle, we're supposed to say certain things, we're supposed to feel a certain way. On the other side of the aisle, we're supposed to say certain things, supposed to say a certain way. But even within our parties, we have factions that are kind of expected to, you know, not get on board or to try to pull things further in one direction or another. And there is a place for that. We get a better outcome when we have disagreement, when people bring up their issues and say, what about this? Have we gone far enough on that? What we've got to learn how to do, though, is get to a point where we have made a final decision and people are willing to support that decision. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I think the people in this room can really help. What happens when someone decides that they're going to be a holdout is they get a lot of attention. They raise a lot of money. Everybody runs to them and says, what can we do to get you on board? Or they want to write an article about why they're not on board. And we always start with the point of disagreement. And if we could take a step back and start at the agreement, we may agree on 95% of it, but we spend all of our time talking about the 5%. And there is a necessary conversation about that 5% to get people on board. But if it bleeds, it leads. And we're always focused on, why do 3 people not want to be part of this? Why is one person, you know, on the floor not voting yet, and everybody's gathered around them trying to make them happy? And I'm Mormon. I'm from Utah. I grew up in a big family. Everyone around me had big families. If this is a classic, like if you throw a fit and won't eat what mom made for dinner and mom has to make something special for you, everybody in the family is going to start wanting something special for dinner. If every time you are the holdout, you get a lot of press and you raise a lot of money and everybody comes to your office to make you feel better, you're going to keep being a holdout. And we have to break some of those paradigms too, where there's got to be a way of rewarding finding solutions and getting things across the finish line. I mean, it is rewarding in and of itself. I sleep better at night when we've done something meaningful during the day. But there has to be a way that the people in this room, the people who are involved, who have skin in the game, who need solutions, can help us get to a point where we're not famous for stopping solutions.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure there's a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm going to ask one last question, and if anyone who is interested in asking a question, can you guys please go line up behind microphones so that you can use microphones. But I'll ask one last question here. Obviously exciting about the SPEED Act moving forward here at the end of the week, hoping a good final number here by Thursday. Y'all want to handicap how many Dems you think come on board, and do we keep the Republican conference together on it?
No.
There's been plenty of energy bills that have passed with 20, 30, 40 Dems. So I would handicap the Dem side. The Republican side is a little tougher to do right now. But I think you probably get 30 or 40 Dems. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope it's more than that. But I think that's probably, remember, we're approaching a midterm for them as well. So I think there's plenty of reason for them to vote for it. Now, I will stay away from the Republican side. I'm not sure yet.
Well, and you touched on this, but I want to give you a chance to reiterate. What can the folks in this room do over the next 72 hours to help both on the Republican and the Democratic side?
I think there are very well-known folks who have good questions that can say, well, it's not perfect. Go talk to them and let them know how important this is. That if we're getting a first down, if we're moving the ball down the field and we're doing something that is going to be transformative, that, by the way, the president campaigned on, then we're making progress. And I think those conversations in individual offices are really, really important.
Boots hit the ground while you're here in town this week.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to turn it over for a few questions. Why don't we start over here? Could you introduce yourself before your question, please?
Yeah, thanks for coming to speak with us today. I'm Sam Lebo, former ClearPath Fellow with Senator Sullivan from Alaska. My question is regarding a permitting issue for a less salient topic, which is carbon sequestration. Representative Pfluger, you introduced the Primacy Certainty Act with Representative Crenshaw, a bill which would expedite state approvals for carbon sequestration wells. Earlier this year, Texas was granted primacy authority for Class 6 wells. Utah is actively pursuing primacy as well. My former boss, Senator Sullivan, introduced companion legislation in the Senate. Can either of you speak to the importance of unlocking the existing permitting logjam at the EPA for Class 6 wells and establishing certainty for CCUS project developers?
Well, from Texas, the reason that I introduced that was because we were being held back by the EPA. And the Railroad Commission, which should have the authority in the state of Texas to grant the permits for those wells, was not, didn't have the approval from the EPA. So that's why this bill was important. So can't speak outside of Texas in particular, but I think that makes sense. If you've got a state that wants to do this, and the EPA should be willing, within the bounds of other preemptive type law to grant the permits for it, and especially in the case of carbon sequestration.
Yeah, in general, I just think primacy is a good way for us to go on solving some of these problems. It makes it easier for businesses, voters, consumers to see where the problem is. If there's a big federal policy that is harming your business, you all know, you're here. It's kind of hard to come to Congress and move the needle. It's a little easier to go to your state house, your state legislators, and say, this is how it's harming us in our state. And it could go in either direction. If you think your state's not doing a good enough job protecting your interests from environmental harms, you can have that conversation at the state level and move things a lot faster. If you are in the Northwest and your energy prices are really high and you wish your state would get on board and start investing in a pipeline that brings natural gas from Pennsylvania to your state, you can move that needle a lot faster at the state level. And you can demand a high quality outcome at the state level. It's much harder to move things at the federal level.
Make these decisions closer to folks who are closer on the ground, know the environmental attributes, right?
Yeah.
Rod, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Great panel. My name is Rod Richardson. I'm the president of the Grace Richardson Fund, a private foundation, and also the co-chair of the Climate and Freedom International Coalition meeting. We gather together folks like you, think tanks, politicians, journalists, once a month for an online meeting of international groups from Europe, South America, Africa, Middle East, North America, who want to talk about these issues. We'd be grateful to have you as a guest. But what I wanted to ask is, you know, I applaud you guys for pushing on federal permitting reform. But even if you get federal permitting reform, there's still going to be permitting problems at state levels. And this is especially severe in regulated states like Utah. In states like Texas, it takes maybe a quarter of the time to put on new infrastructure into your electricity markets as it does in a regulated market. So what can you do, or are you willing to do to create incentives for the regulated markets to make it easier for them to move to a faster process so that the reform that you do at the federal level isn't, in effect, wasted?
Well, I'm open to suggestion on that. It sounds like you already have some good ideas, so come talk to me and let's look at those. But in general, I mean, this is something that Utah is working on, making sure that state regulations are not mirroring the inefficiencies in the federal regulations. And so back to my last answer, this is why having state primacy on some of these issues makes a lot of sense, because if we have companies in Utah that are trying to develop and the state's hanging them up, it's a lot easier to go change the regulations that are a problem at the state level. And what we need to be doing at the federal level is making sure we are not the problem and we're not standing in the way. There's been an assumption for a couple of generations now that the states are regulating. They don't care as much about the environment. And I think we have ample evidence now that that's not accurate. And we just need to let the states do what they're designed to do.
I'll just add, and we know this very well in my district because a good portion of the Permian Basin exists in southeastern New Mexico, in 2 counties in particular. And just across the state line, the same basin, the same hydrocarbons, the same exact what should be product, in one state takes a week, in another state takes over a year, which is maddening when you think about the fact that you know, you're a mile apart, less than, on that state line, and if it's for environmental reasons, you're doing what federally should be applied to both states, and that law already exists, so that's the superseding law that exists in the way that the states are carrying this out. So I think there's got to be a carrot and a stick approach to it, but that, I think, shows us even more why we need to codify and to put in statute laws that actually tell you how long the review and how long the analysis and how long the project, you know, should take ultimately, with the state then being given some very strict guidelines on how that's going to be built out.
All right, I think we have time for one little last quick question.
Just very quickly, Congressman, you talked about innovation, and you talked about how in Texas there's been a remarkable increase in the production of oil and energy and a reduction in emissions at the same time. My name is Fred Pfeffel. I represent, I'm from EPS, Energy Partner Solutions, and I represent a Texas company that has helped with the innovation to reduce the emissions of diesel through the TexLite program. And we're trying to expand that and go beyond Texas to the whole United States. So how can we take some of what Texas is doing and leading on and take it beyond the borders? And I'd love to talk to you some more about what we have in mind with my client.
This has been my goal ever since I was in office. That was supposed to be funny, guys, to take what we're doing in Texas and transition it all the way through the U.S. No, think about this. I brought one of President Biden's EPA directors out to the Permian Basin. And the individual was shocked at the number of monitoring sites that we had on individual drilling or tank batteries or midstream facilities. Absolutely shocked. Methane detection as one example. But that innovation, I mean, yes, it is for the environment, and my district cares deeply about leaving the land in a better place, but also it's economic. They're capturing that product and they're selling it. And they're doing so because they had the chance to innovate. The EPA did not tell them to do this, by the way. They did this because there was a market approach, and that innovation paid dividends. And, oh, by the way, they could achieve multiple goals. So would love to meet with you, would love to see all that you're doing. But this is the perfect example of all the balls. I'm sorry to go just a little bit long on this. But there's a lot of different things in priorities, goals. I call them juggling these balls in the air. You have these environmental issues. Of course, we want to preserve our environment, the air and the water. You've got the affordability issue of energy. You have the ability to have a geopolitical tool and a lever. Think about Ukraine and being invaded and the pipelines that were involved there. There's all sorts of issues, but innovation solves all of those. It solves for all of those. And that's why what we are attempting to do this week is so very important because it sets the conditions to have some success along those lines.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Good luck this week getting this wave of permit proposals out of the House. And then we're all ready to hit the ground running with you all in 2026 to get it to the President's desk. So thank you all for your leadership. Thank you for being here, and happy holidays.
Thanks.
Oh, yes. I believe we have a 15-minute break in between panels here. So if folks want to grab a drink, and we'll be back here in 15 minutes. Thank you.